A sitting judge mocks Barron Trump in open court. Seconds later, he's in handcuffs. What happened inside that courtroom left everyone stunned, including the judge himself. This isn't just a legal twist, it's a political earthquake. Let's break it down. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. In a moment that has since gone viral across social media, a courtroom showdown took a bizarre and deeply unsettling turn when Judge Andrew H. Stones, a name most Americans had never heard before, appeared to mock 18-year-old Barron Trump. The scene was surreal. Barron, tall, composed, and calm, walked into the courtroom expecting a routine appearance. This was related to a private civil matter involving the Trump family estate, something usually handled quietly, without much media attention. But nothing is quiet when your last name is Trump. And in this case, it wasn't just the name that made headlines, it was what happened inside the courtroom that shocked the nation. The hearing was meant to be procedural. A simple statement, a few documents, and likely a reschedule for a later date. But things didn't go according to plan. As Barron stood up to address the court, Judge Stones raised an eyebrow and smirked, a gesture that at first might have seemed harmless. But his next words would spark outrage far beyond the courtroom walls. "Oh, look who's here," Judge Stones said with a mocking tone. "The next Trump dynasty in the making. Should we roll out the red carpet?" The room went silent, unsure how to react. A few chuckled nervously, others looked around, waiting for someone to object. But the damage was already done. What should have been a respectful legal process had suddenly turned into a political spectacle, right from the bench. For Barron Trump, who had largely stayed out of the public eye during his father's presidency, this was a rare and vulnerable moment. He didn't lash out. He didn't storm off. Instead, he stood straight and replied, "Your Honor, I'm here to follow the legal process like any other citizen." But Judge Stones wasn't done. He continued making pointed comments referring to Barron as the young prince, and at one point said, "I assume your father taught you how to lawyer your way out of things." Those in the gallery looked on in disbelief. Legal analysts watching the live stream began raising concerns immediately. Was this personal bias? Was the judge mocking a citizen because of his family name? And more importantly, was this even legal? Social media exploded within minutes. Clips of the interaction were shared on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Hashtags like Barron deserves, respect, Judge Stones, and courtroom bias started trending. People weren't just outraged, they were stunned. This wasn't a late-night comedy sketch. This was a real courtroom, under the authority of the law, where a sitting judge was publicly mocking an 18-year-old for his last name. Even those who don't typically support the Trump family expressed discomfort. "No young adult should be treated that way in a courtroom," one viral tweet read. Politics aside, this is disgusting. And then, just when it seemed things couldn't get more dramatic, Pam Bondi entered the room. The former Florida Attorney General and well-known Trump ally had reportedly been monitoring the case from behind the scenes, anticipating potential issues. When she heard what was happening, she didn't hesitate. Dressed in a sleek navy suit, Bondi walked straight to the courtroom with legal documents in hand and authority in her step. She stood up and addressed the bench with calm determination. "Your Honor, your conduct today has violated judicial ethics and courtroom decorum. You have mocked and humiliated a private citizen in a public forum based on personal and political bias." Judge Stones rolled his eyes. "Ms. Bondi, this is my courtroom. I'll decide what's appropriate." But Bondi wasn't intimidated. She handed over the emergency filing, an official complaint backed by legal precedent. Under Florida law, in extreme situations of judicial misconduct, intervention can occur immediately to protect the integrity of the court. Within moments, 2 federal marshals entered the courtroom. What happened next was something out of a movie. Pam Bondi looked directly at Judge Stones and with full authority said, "You are being removed pending judicial review." The marshals approached the bench, placed handcuffs on the judge, and escorted him out of the courtroom as the room erupted into chaos. Phones were pulled out. Cameras flashed. The video hit social media before the judge had even left the courthouse. And just like that, the story took on a whole new life. Within hours, media outlets across the country picked it up. Judge cuffed. In court after mocking Barron Trump, Pam Bondi removes judge in shocking courtroom drama. Barron Trump stays composed as judge humiliates himself. Commentators from all political sides started weighing in. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, everyone had something to say. While some defended the judge as simply being sarcastic, most agreed. His actions crossed a line. Judges are supposed to be impartial, professional, and above personal politics, but what happened that day called all of that into question. The courtroom became the stage for a national debate, not about Trump politics per se, but about respect, power, and justice. Meanwhile, Barron Trump left the courtroom without saying much, but his composure, quiet strength, and dignified presence left a lasting impression. For the first time, America saw a new side of the youngest Trump, not as a teenager in the background, but as a young man standing tall in the face of disrespect. Judge Stones now faces a full investigation. His past cases are being reviewed for signs of bias. And as for Barron, his next appearance will be before a different judge, one hopefully more focused on the law than on politics. What started as a routine legal hearing turned into a viral moment of justice, controversy, and courtroom chaos. One thing's for sure, everyone will remember the day Judge Stones mocked Barron Trump and ended up in handcuffs minutes later. Barron Trump walked into the courtroom alone, but with the weight of a name that echoed across American politics. Freshly 18, the youngest son of former President Donald Trump had decided to represent himself in what was expected to be a straightforward civil hearing. The case involved a minor dispute over allocations in the Trump family estate. No criminal charges, no media circus. At least, that's how it was supposed to go. But the moment Barron entered the courtroom, it was clear this wasn't going to be a normal proceeding. The gallery was filled. Reporters, political observers, and curious onlookers had packed the room. Not because of the legal content, but because of who was standing trial. And sitting at the bench was Judge Andrew H. Stones, a man whose reputation preceded him. Judge Stones had made headlines before. He was known for his strict courtroom demeanor, but also for pushing boundaries with his personal commentary. He'd been accused, though never formally charged, of using his position to take political jabs. Today, with the Trump name before him, it was as if the stage was set for drama. As Barron approached the podium to speak, the courtroom fell into a tense silence. Cameras were forbidden, but journalists scribbled feverishly. Everyone was eager to see how the young Trump would handle himself. Then came the moment that would ignite a national controversy. Before Barron could even begin, Judge Stones leaned back in his chair, smirked, and interrupted. "Oh, the next Trump dynasty wants to speak now," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Should I roll out the red carpet too?" There was a brief pause, then awkward laughter from a few in the gallery. But most remained quiet, unsure whether they had just witnessed a joke or a breach of professional conduct. Barron, clearly surprised, blinked, collected himself, and responded with remarkable calm. "Your Honor, I'm just here to follow the legal process like any other citizen." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flash his last name like a badge. He didn't even acknowledge the insult directly. It was a poised and measured response that stood in stark contrast to the judge's mockery. But Judge Stones wasn't finished. He continued to comment throughout Barron's opening statement, referring to him several times as Prince Barron, and even saying, "I assume your father gave you some legal coaching before this?" The courtroom began to shift. What started as curious attention turned into uncomfortable murmuring. Legal observers, including retired judges and attorneys in attendance, began whispering among themselves. Was this sarcasm or something more serious? One legal analyst, present for a post-hearing panel, later stated, I've been practicing law for over 30 years. I've never seen a judge mock a litigant like that, especially one representing themselves. This was not just inappropriate, it was borderline judicial misconduct. Barron, despite the mounting pressure, continued with his statement. He outlined the basics of the dispute clearly, referencing estate documents and using legal terms with unexpected precision for someone his age. It became obvious that he had prepared thoroughly and wasn't expecting any kind of special treatment. But Judge Stones seemed intent on turning the hearing into a performance. At one point, as Barron cited a clause in a family trust agreement, Stones interjected, "Well, if your father's deals are anything to go by, I'd double-check the math." The courtroom stirred again, this time not with laughter, but with outrage. Several members of the public gallery began shaking their heads. One man audibly whispered, "That's not right." Another person was escorted out after yelling, "This is a joke." Meanwhile, legal commentators on social media who were following the live text updates from court reporters began posting instantly, "This is not how a judge should act." Barron Trump deserves the same respect as any citizen in court. Unprofessional doesn't begin to describe Judge Stones today. This is turning into a political ambush. At the same time, some anti-Trump voices online tried to brush it off as harmless fun. But even many of them began acknowledging the imbalance of power at play. After all, an 18-year-old with no legal team was being publicly taunted by the person meant to uphold the law in the room. It wasn't just a moment of poor judgment, it was setting a dangerous precedent. Some legal experts compared it to courtroom bullying, especially since Barron was choosing to navigate the legal process himself, something rare and commendable for someone his age. Judge Stones, whether emboldened by the crowd or his own ego, seemed completely unfazed by the growing unease. He continued the hearing without acknowledging the inappropriateness of his comments. And yet, through it all, Barron never lost his composure. He stood his ground, maintained a respectful tone, and refused to engage in the personal jabs being thrown at him. His maturity in the face of humiliation won over many watching the situation unfold in real time. Later, one court reporter wrote in a blog post, "Barron Trump walked into that courtroom alone, but left as the only adult in the room." By the end of the session, tensions were boiling. The mocking comments, the visible discomfort of the gallery, and the whispers among legal minds all pointed to a brewing storm. And just when it felt like the courtroom couldn't take any more drama, Pam Bondi entered. But that, of course, is a story for the next chapter. What happened in that courtroom was more than just sarcasm. It was a test of dignity, restraint, and power. And it left Americans asking, when the law becomes entertainment, who's really in control? Just when the tension in the courtroom had reached a boiling point, when spectators couldn't believe what they were witnessing, the doors opened, and in walked former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. The reaction in the room was electric. Some gasped, others whispered in stunned voices, "Is that Pam Bondi?" And yes, it was her. Known for her bold courtroom style, unapologetic loyalty to Donald Trump, and sharp legal mind, Bondi wasn't there to observe. She was there on a mission. No one had expected her. There were no prior announcements, no scheduled appearance. But sources would later confirm that Bondi had been monitoring the hearing remotely after receiving word that something troubling was unfolding. She had reportedly been tipped off about Judge Stones's behavior, comments laced with sarcasm, political jabs, and courtroom conduct that had crossed the line from tough to targeted. And in her mind, that wasn't just unprofessional, it was unconstitutional. Wasting no time, Bondi rose and addressed the bench. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear, unwavering, and cutting through the stunned silence of the room. "Your comments today have veered far from the legal scope of this hearing. You are not presiding with impartiality. You are mocking a private citizen, an 18-year-old who has come here in good faith to follow due process. I am asking you to recuse yourself from this case, effective immediately." The gallery held its breath. Judge Andrew H. Stones, known for his brash courtroom persona and controversial remarks, leaned back in his chair and let out a chuckle. His response was dismissive, even smug. "This isn't some Trump rally, Ms. Bondi." "Sit down," he said, shaking his head. "You're not even counsel of record here." It was the kind of reply that might have sent others back to their seat. But not Pam Bondi. Without flinching, she approached the bench. In her hands were documents, official filings she had submitted just minutes earlier. These were not symbolic gestures. These were real, legal motions backed by Florida statutes and precedent. Bondi laid the papers before the clerk and addressed the courtroom with authority. These documents outline multiple violations of judicial ethics committed during this hearing. The mocking of a litigant, the injection of political bias, and repeated comments that undermine this court's integrity. Under Florida law, emergency intervention is permitted when a judge is found to be acting in clear violation of judicial conduct standards. That threshold has been met today, publicly and indisputably. The tension was now thick in the air. Members of the gallery were on edge. Phones, though not permitted to record, were buzzing with live updates. Reporters could hardly scribble fast enough. No one had seen anything like this before. Judge Stones, visibly irritated, stood and tried to reassert control. "I won't tolerate being threatened in my own courtroom," he barked, but Bondi calmly countered. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this courtroom belongs to the people. You are entrusted with authority to uphold the law, not abuse it." Then came the moment that no one could have predicted. From the rear of the courtroom, 2 federal marshals entered, summoned under emergency judicial review protocols. This wasn't symbolic. It was real. Pam Bondi turned toward them and nodded. "Please, escort Judge Stones out of this courtroom pending review by the Judicial Oversight Commission." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Even Judge Stones appeared caught off guard. "You're joking," he said, incredulous. "You can't." But the marshals moved swiftly. One approached the bench, while the other positioned behind him. With quiet efficiency, they asked the judge to place his hands behind his back. He hesitated. Then, with dozens of eyes on him and whispers filling the room, he reluctantly complied. Click, click. The cuffs went on. Judge Andrew H. Stones was officially removed from his own courtroom. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in stunned silence. It was a moment that would be replayed on news broadcasts, dissected in legal panels, and shared across every corner of the internet. Headlines began writing themselves. Pam Bondi shuts down. Rogue judge in Barron Trump hearing. Courtroom chaos. Judge cuffed after mocking Trump's son. Judicial overreach meets emergency justice. Barron Trump, who had remained composed throughout the hearing, stood still, quietly observing as the drama unfolded around him. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat, but it was clear to everyone watching. He had been vindicated. Later, legal experts would confirm that Bondi had acted within the bounds of Florida's Emergency Judicial Review Code, rarely invoked, but powerful when needed. Her filing had cited sections dealing with judicial impartiality, abuse of authority, and protection of due process for all citizens, regardless of their political affiliations. Back at the courthouse, a new judge was appointed by midday to oversee the remainder of the hearing. This time, there were no jokes, no jabs, and no political theater. Just the law, delivered as it was meant to be. In the days that followed, video clips and reenactments of the incident went viral. Bondi was hailed by some as a hero, criticized by others as a political warrior, but no one could deny the legality of what she had done. As for Judge Stones, a formal investigation was launched immediately. Judicial conduct boards began reviewing not only this case but several others from his past. Analysts speculated that his career on the bench might be over. And Barron Trump? He left the courtroom without a word to the press, stepping into a black SUV surrounded by quiet security. But in the court of public opinion, Many now saw him not just as Donald Trump's youngest son, but as a young man who handled public humiliation with dignity and who, when wronged, saw the system rise to defend him. Within minutes of the courtroom drama, the internet exploded. Although cameras weren't allowed inside, that didn't stop eyewitnesses, journalists, and legal bloggers from rushing to social media to report what they had just seen. Some even captured snippets of the aftermath from hallway interviews, court sketches, and dramatic recreations. The hashtags told the story. Barron Strong, Judge Stones, and the Pam Bondi Power began trending on X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube within the hour. It wasn't just a legal moment. It had become a national conversation. The internet reacts almost. Immediately, users across social platforms began weighing in. Videos with titles like "Barron Trump stands tall in courtroom chaos" and "Pam Bondi drops the hammer on rogue judge" pulled in hundreds of thousands of views. TikTok clips reenacting the courtroom exchange reached millions in a matter of hours. Some were comedic, others were emotional. Most were in disbelief, but as always, the internet was divided. Some defended Judge Stones, calling his remarks harmless, just jokes, or even deserved sarcasm. "It's called having a sense of humor," one user wrote. "Barron's a Trump, he should expect pushback." But that opinion didn't hold majority ground. Thousands of others condemned Stone's conduct outright, saying his comments were disgraceful, bullying, and abuse of judicial power. You don't treat any 18-year-old like that, no matter the last name. A judge is not a comedian. He disrespected the robe. What truly caught everyone off guard, however, was Barron Trump's behavior. Despite the courtroom mockery, he never raised his voice. He never lashed out. He stood with composure, dignity, and control, something rarely seen even among seasoned adults facing legal pressure. Even critics of his father took notice. One political commentator on MSNBC said, "I may not be a fan of the Trump family, but..." Today, Barron Trump showed remarkable maturity in the face of public ridicule. Mainstream media coverage within hours, all major news outlets had picked up the story. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and others ran primetime specials. On CNN, the legal panel was divided. "This judge undermined due process by inserting personal political commentary," said a former federal prosecutor. "If it were any other private citizen, this would be a clear ethical breach." Fox News, as expected, came out swinging in defense of both Barron and Pam Bondi. This wasn't just bias, it was judicial bullying, and Pam Bondi acted lawfully and swiftly to restore order, said one anchor. Meanwhile, legal talk shows across YouTube, Twitter Spaces, and Instagram Lives debated three main questions. Was this a violation of due process? Legal analysts were nearly unanimous. Yes, Judge Andrew H. Stone's behavior, they argued, compromised the impartiality required in a courtroom. Mocking a private citizen, especially one who was self-representing, could legally be seen as undermining that citizen's right to a fair hearing. One former appellate judge noted, "Judges are held to a higher standard. When a judge uses his bench to make jokes at a litigant's expense, it sends a message. This isn't a fair courtroom. That alone justifies emergency intervention." Does Judge Stones have a history of bias? As journalists began digging into his past rulings, a disturbing pattern emerged. Judge Stones, who had served for over a decade, had previously been accused, not formally charged, of letting personal opinions bleed into his courtroom behavior. While no action had been taken in earlier incidents, many now wondered if those prior complaints had been warning signs. Courtroom audio from past cases began resurfacing. In one clip, he allegedly told a defendant during sentencing, "You remind me of a certain former president I won't name." In another, he quipped, "Do your donors know you're here today?" To a political activist facing a civil suit, these patterns added fuel to the fire. What power did Pam Bondi use to have him removed? The big question that stunned the public. Can a judge really be cuffed and removed on the spot? The answer, yes, but only under specific legal conditions. Pam Bondi had filed what's known as an emergency motion for judicial review, a rare but powerful mechanism in Florida law. It allows for immediate judicial suspension if there is credible evidence of judicial bias, personal misconduct obstruction of due process. Bondi's emergency action cited Florida Code paragraph 3802 and paragraph 112.317, which allow for temporary removal pending investigation in cases of ethics violations or abuse of authority. Bondi had not only filed the motion, she brought the evidence with her: witnesses, transcripts, statements from legal observers in the room. She was prepared, and she acted fast. 2 marshals, operating under the authority of the state's Judicial Oversight Office, were already standing by. The moment the motion was accepted, Judge Stones became subject to removal. It wasn't just dramatic, it was lawful. Barron's unexpected moment in the spotlight. While the internet exploded with hashtags and debate, one name remained at the center: Barron Trump. Many expected him to become just another side note in the Trump legacy. But that day, in a crowded courtroom filled with mockery and scrutiny, Barron stood tall. By evening, even late-night talk shows were commenting on his composure. One popular host said, "Honestly, Barron handled that judge better than most politicians." Kid didn't even flinch. Memes appeared, some serious, some playful. But one thing was clear: Barron Trump had earned a rare thing in today's world: respect across political lines. Final thoughts as investigations into Judge Stones continued, and media interviews with Bondi and legal experts unfolded. The public had witnessed something rarely seen. A judge abusing the power of the bench, a young man rising above political scorn, and a bold intervention that reminded America of the importance of equal justice under law. The story wasn't just about politics. It was about dignity, accountability, and the courage to stand your ground, even when the system seemed stacked against you. And for Barron Trump, this wasn't just a court appearance. It was a coming-of-age moment, televised by the internet, and etched into the public record. Aftermath. The fallout of a courtroom earthquake. What started as a routine civil hearing has now sent shockwaves across the country and beyond. The legal community is still grappling with what they witnessed. Political commentators are still dissecting it. And the public? They're still glued to the story. At the center of it all are 3 names: Judge Andrew H. Stones, Barron Trump, and Pam Bondi. Let's start with the judge who turned a courtroom into a spectacle. Judge Stones, under investigation. After the courtroom clash, Judge Andrew H. Stones didn't just walk out of his own courtroom in handcuffs. He walked into the center of a brewing legal storm. The state's Judicial Oversight Committee confirmed that a formal ethics complaint has been filed against him, citing abuse of authority, inappropriate courtroom conduct, and potential political bias. But that's not all. According to insider sources within the legal system, his previous rulings and courtroom behavior are now under review as part of a broader investigation. Legal scholars have noted that while controversial judges aren't new, Stones's conduct, on record, particularly his mocking of a young litigant, may be grounds for suspension or permanent removal. "We don't want political commentators in robes," said one former appellate court judge. What happened here crossed every line of professionalism. Courtroom transcripts from past cases are being reanalyzed. Complaints once brushed aside are now resurfacing. And as of now, Judge Stones has been placed on administrative leave, pending a full inquiry. The question isn't just whether Stones will lose his job, it's whether his legacy will be permanently stained. Barron Trump, a new public image for years. Barron Trump has been the quiet one, the youngest Trump, shielded from the spotlight. But that changed in a single afternoon. When he stepped into that courtroom, he wasn't a political figure, he wasn't a campaign prop. He was an 18-year-old trying to handle a civil dispute through the legal system, quietly, professionally, and respectfully. And when he was mocked, publicly, repeatedly, and unfairly, He didn't explode. He didn't shout. He didn't storm out. He stood tall. He stayed calm. And America noticed. Across social media, people who had never commented on Barron were suddenly praising him. "That kid has more composure than half the Senate," one tweet read. "Didn't think I'd be applauding a Trump today, but here we are," said another. Even some of his father's loudest critics publicly acknowledged that Barron showed maturity and grace far beyond his years. Overnight, he became something rare in politics, a figure that both sides of the aisle could respect, if only briefly. For the first time, Barron was seen not just as the youngest Trump, but as a young man stepping into adulthood, gracefully, under extreme pressure. Pam Bondi. Back in the spotlight. If there's one person who changed the entire course of this story, it's Pam Bondi. The former Florida Attorney General didn't just show up, she took charge. Her dramatic intervention was legally sound, strategically planned, and flawlessly executed, and her decision to call out the judge on the spot. That didn't just make headlines. It reminded Americans, especially conservatives, of why Bondi was once considered a rising Republican star. Now speculation is swirling. Will Pam Bondi return to politics? Is she positioning herself for a larger role in a possible Trump 2024 campaign? Political analysts are already weighing the possibilities. Her name is being floated for future cabinet roles, legal advisory positions, or even a Senate run. Regardless of her plans, one thing is certain: Pam Bondi's stock just skyrocketed. Among Trump supporters, she's being hailed as a guardian of justice. Among legal professionals, she's earned respect for knowing when and how to act under rare emergency provisions. And across social media, she's trending as a symbol of swift, decisive leadership. The civil case, postponed for now. And
what about the civil case that started all of this? Sources close to the court have confirmed that the case has been officially postponed.
A new judge will be appointed in the coming days, and the hearing will resume under much tighter scrutiny. While details of the case remain sealed due to its private nature, legal observers believe it relates to estate or asset management within the Trump family. Barron had chosen to represent himself in this specific matter, which is rare but not unheard of, especially if the dispute is considered minor. Court officials have confirmed that Barron will not need to appear again until the new judge is assigned, and a hearing date is rescheduled. In the meantime, legal protections are reportedly being put in place to ensure that future proceedings remain professional, neutral, and free of political influence. The bigger picture. This isn't just a story about courtroom drama. It's not just about a bold legal move or a trending hashtag. It's about power, fairness, and integrity in a system that so many Americans fear is broken. Judge Stones became a symbol of what many feel is wrong with parts of the justice system: unchecked power, political jabs, and courtroom theatrics. Pam Bondi became a counterforce, proof that legal professionals can and should step in when the system wavers. And Barron Trump? He became something he's never been before, a symbol of calm under fire, a young adult navigating a storm of scrutiny, with a level of poise most adults struggle to maintain. In a political world filled with shouting matches and cable news clashes, this story gave us something different. A moment where integrity, professionalism, and accountability briefly returned to the spotlight. Closing thought: the courtroom is quiet now. The judge's bench is empty, but the impact of what happened will echo for weeks, maybe longer. One thing is certain: the next time Barron Trump walks into a courtroom or a camera lens, people will be paying attention, not because of his last name, but because of how he carried himself when it mattered most. This courtroom scene wasn't just about a judge crossing the line. It was about power, respect, and how even the youngest in a high-profile family can be targeted. But it also showed that in today's world of social media and immediate accountability, no one, not even a judge, is above the rules. Whether you support the Trumps or not, one thing is clear: this story was about justice being demanded and served in real time. If you found this story wild, comment, And don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable real-life moments and courtroom dramas. Let us know, was Judge Stones out of line? Or was this just political theater?